Eddie Murphy was in a Nickelodeon movie. Imagine that. And I'm about saying imagine that, but at the same time, the movie's called Imagine That. You get the idea. And I remember, based on the concept of the plot, I wasn't sure exactly what to expect going into it. I mean, I heard it was fine, but and yet it was not well received to the point that obviously there was never any follow up. I mean, granted, not that I expected a movie like this to get a follow up. Uh, I I can't say I'm surprised by what I got. Here's the plot. Evan Danielson, played by Murphy, is a money mogul who's seeking to impress his boss, played by Ronnie Cox, enough in order to get a promotion. But then the problem is the week he's trying to do this, his wife, whom he's separated from, played by Nicole Parker, is dealing with something at work that requires a lot of her attention, and thus for the week he has to take care of their young daughter Olivia, played by a very young Yara Shahidi. The girl has imaginary friends who she communicates with through her blankie, her Gugu, I believe she calls it, Guga, and her Guga, I think it's called, and she refuses to part with it no matter how hard he tries to, constantly screaming her head off whenever he attempts to take it away. However, after she draws on a whole bunch of his papers and a whole bunch of his work papers, and he communicates a bunch of different drawings, and then he communicates what the drawings are through the meeting, it's discovered that that these drawings have predicted numerous developments that have occurred with all these companies. His boss at first thinks it's the insider trading, but Evan is able to convince him otherwise, and discovers that through Olivia's imaginary friends, he can figure out what corporations are the best to work with and which ones aren't, and thus, in doing so, get ahead in his job. So he begins to play more with Olivia and find out more about how to do these things, and he climbs up the ladder at work. But the question soon arises: can he ultimately put Olivia in front of his work and do the right thing? I'm sure you know by the way movies like this usually turn out. So, yeah, I'm wondering to myself. So, yeah, I remembered thinking I hoped that the movie would be fine, and it was. I mean, this is one of the more inoffensive, I think, Nickelodeon movies made. It certainly isn't one of the most impressive by any stretch of the imagination, but the fact that, yeah, I mean, there is effort put into it, and there is an appreciation for the simplistic tone that it has, too, if that makes sense. I mean, obviously he has to. I mean, they don't. Until the end of the film, they don't really tell you whether or not the whole thing is actually real. In fact, there's a bit about Johnny Whitefeather, played by Thomas Hayden Church, is a rival at work who is desperately trying to beat Evan and is resorting to try to figure out what his tactics are. And then there's the point where he realizes that playing with the daughter's blanket is a spiritual use. You think that's set up for him stealing the blanket. It doesn't. Instead, he tries to do the same thing with his own son, and yeah, it doesn't really go anywhere beyond that. And, you know, you would have thought that would lead to, like, Thomas Hayden Church abducting her and then, like, going nuts, but then no, that's not where the movie goes. Which I can respect that, because it tried to keep things civilized, and it tried to keep things at a normal pacing, and yeah, that's a pretty good word for this movie. It's normal. I mean, like I said, they don't acknowledge whether or not the blanket or the imaginary friends are actually magical until the end of the film, with the exception of the spiritual aspect. And I can respect that because you are watching this unfold in front of you and wondering how it's possible, but at the same, you wonder if it's the magic of the blanket, if like the girl, if it has special abilities to predict business corporation business transactions that like one would not anticipate a girl of this age would have. And again, it gets really sweet because, I mean, they want to sell you on this movie the fact that like he's taking advantage of his daughter and her blanket, but at the same time, all his daughter ever wanted from him was to give her attention and to play with her, and he did that. So when she gets mad at the end, when he is so fixated on the blanket, it's wrong for him to be fixated on the blanket. It felt bizarre, like they were trying to hammer the message home, and yet at the same time, they never really went into it in the first place. And yeah, there are moments where you kind of laugh at Eddie Murphy's physical comedy. I mean, you get the sense that this man, he's done this for years and years, so he has a good idea how to do it, and sometimes he's been unfocused, and thus that's why a lot of his movies of recent years have not done so well. And why he doesn't make that many movies anymore with this kind of thing, if at all. And yeah, I mean, he's likable in spite of the fact that at times you wonder what this guy's deal is. My complaints about the movie involve the fact that like there's a section of the movie where he's desperately trying to get in touch with his daughter so he can get the blanket. And, well, his ex-wife and her friends, or his estranged wife and her friends, are trying to stop him because they believe that he's going to make a scene with the girl with Olivia freaking out again. But at the same time, I mean, they saw that one point where he was playing with her with the blanket. He was holding the blanket, and she wasn't screaming, and it just, yeah. I mean, it doesn't drop the ball anywhere near the same degree on plot elements the way that Hotel for Dogs did. I mean, in the case of, this movie, I suppose, Hotel for Dogs, I suppose, is a bit more of a defined film. At the same time, this movie is a better movie. This movie had more thought into the writing put into it, but at the same time, still tried to be a kid's film, and thus there was simplistic factor to it for those reasons. And I couldn't help but watch this movie and compare it to Bedtime Stories, which I think is one of Adam Sandler's more underrated films, and yeah, frankly, that's a better movie than this. It does the same thing and in a similar way, but at the same time, it really defined itself more and put more thought into what it was showing you. So therefore, I thought that because of that, this movie didn't quite hit the same points home. The best thing I can say about this movie is, though, it's harmless. I mean, again, there were moments where I was charmed, and there were moments where I was enjoying what I was watching, and the performances, I suppose, for the most part, although Thomas Hayden Church playing an Indian, what? Or a Native American, but then they kind of acknowledge the stupidity of that in the film, so it kind of makes sense, ultimately, by the end of the day. Although, I will say this, Yara Shahidi, my God, at such a young age, she nails this. She really impressed. So you can completely understand seeing her on something like Blackish now, and yeah, still being impressed. And being impressed with her there, and she's showing, hey, she showed the potential at a young age, and she's followed through with it. So yes, well, I certainly wouldn't call this a bad movie. It's no great movie by any stretch of the imagination, for lack of a better term. But again, I think if you were to watch this with your kids, you'd have a good time. Your kids would really enjoy it, and you wouldn't feel like you wasted your time either. Take that for what it's worth and give it a shot.